All right, now joining us on Tennis Channel Inside and Back again. You can find her on the 3 podcast with Joel Drucker and Gil Gross on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. You find her on a ton of publications covering tennis, including Tennis Connected. Very statistically and analytically driven. One of the best guests I have on the show, not just saying that. Amy Lundy returns to the program. Amy, welcome back to the podcast. A lot to discuss with this Indian Wells tournament, but I'm excited to do so.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on this show, chat with you. You're so smooth with your delivery and your questions. It's always fun. And yes, Indian Wells is one of my favorite tournaments.
Yeah, it was great. I got to spend a few days there. Good to be back in the mix. Lot to dive into with this tournament, and I know it's a standalone part of the schedule. So we're going to get to the biggest upset that happened, Amy. But I just wanted to know from your perspective. You track tennis year round like I do, but it is kind of hard to judge this. And I wanted to ask the question of, are you judging this kind of as its own little mini season? Because it is kind of funky, right? Like we have 2 huge hardcourt events, a lot of money, a lot of ranking points, but in between some clay events in the South, some tennis in the Middle East, and now we're going to be going to the clay in Europe. So how do you judge or gauge what we're seeing here in the Sunshine Double?
I love the Sunshine Double just because it's 2 back-to-back amazing tournaments in my home country. But I've always thought, does it make sense to have these 2 back-to-back? Because they're on opposite ends of the United States, and the conditions are so different, and it's leading into clay. So, and it can get really hot too, especially in Miami. So I've always thought, like, if I could redo the calendar somehow, I maybe would have Miami start the year before Australia, but it is what it is. And the cool thing about it is if you get somebody who wins both, like Swiatek did a couple of years ago, it is an impressive achievement.
Yeah, it really is. And it can also be star making, especially Indian Wells. Looking back at who won, Osaka, Andreescu on the women's side, you've seen the very best in the game. Everybody in men's tennis, the big 4, the big 3, I should say, won this tournament and propelled to greater heights. One of those members, the only active one right now on tour, we'll see what happens with Rafa, but Novak Djokovic loses to Luca Nardi in the 3rd round. It was a stunning upset, to say the least. A 20-year-old Italian lucky loser, Amy, wasn't supposed to be in this main draw. Grew up idolizing a lot of tennis players, including Novak Djokovic, and he beats the number 1 player in the world in 3 sets. First things first, and we'll get to Novak, but for Nardi's perspective, it was refreshing to see someone in this moment really rise up, go for his shots, hit blistering shot after blistering shot, and show no fear in the 3rd set when the tensions were getting high.
Mitch, isn't it interesting to look and see how different players will approach playing Novak? Will they attempt to redline? Will they slow ball him? Will they mix and match? Will they serve and volley? And this guy chose attempting to redline, and it worked. It really did work for him. I loved hearing about his backstory on the Tennis Channel telecast, talking about how he likes to ride his motorcycle and eat his mom's pasta. He's a pretty chill dude. He really brought it. And, being Italian, that's like one of Novak's best languages. So they had some Italian at the net after the match. It was a weird match in many ways because I think Novak won 1 more point than Nardi did. Novak was in and out with his focus. There was that one really odd point where Nardi thought the ball was out, and because he's a challenger level player typically, he's not used to the automatic line calling, so he just kind of popped it back, and then they played the point. And really entertaining, unusual. I will say that Novak has had these types of losses before, so I'm not pulling the alarm just yet.
Right. So, yeah, it was also great to see with Nardi how, they said, oh, you're playing Tommy Paul next. He had no idea. He was just so in the moment. He was like laughing, like, oh, is that true? Like and it's a great story to see for him. I hope he keeps it going. He's into the top 100 at the end of this tournament, and he'll have a chance to keep his career going. Another Italian tennis moment for sure. For Novak, and I guess the first thing too, you mentioned that weird point. I wasn't really a fan of, how Novak handled it from start to finish, including at the net, but I understand that it's a tense moment, and I cut players more slack when they're in the heat of battle. It wasn't totally egregious, but it was the right decision and handled properly by the chair. That said, I agree with you in the sense that it's not a alarming thing that, he has a loss here. We've seen him. He's said openly, up to like 5 years ago that I'm prioritizing majors. That's the real focus. I think it was after he lost to Cole Schreiber or Roberto Bautista Agut in one of these same tournaments. But it is a little strange, Amy, right, to see him not have any titles and not really have any momentum at mid-March of the start of a tennis season. So that's the part that's strange. And anytime age gets brought into this, which you have to acknowledge that he's 36 going on 37, you can ask questions and wonder if, we're starting to see a slow but inevitable decline.
Oh, I hate those questions. But I just have really dedicated myself, because I do a podcast on the big three, to trying to listen to what the player is saying and stay in the present. Because if we
Yeah,
spend all our time focusing on when these guys are going to retire, or are we seeing a diminishment in skills, then we're missing some of the really great stuff. And the
right.
past 5 years with Djokovic, there's been some really great moments in there when some people had him retired.
Yeah. It's a fair point to say, and obviously being a victim of his own success, right? The guy won 3 out of 4 slams, was one set away from winning all four last year. And if he's slipping, it might be slipping to top 3 or 4 versus number one. But it's, again,
Right.
where we put him up to. I think the decision to me, which kind of stands out, and I wanted your perspective, he didn't play Dubai, didn't play anything in the Middle East. And that's where, you know, after not winning Australia, I was curious to that because that has always been, a momentum builder for him going into this year. So he is being more selective with his scheduling at the very least for 2024.
All players should be, but particularly when you get over 30, I think you have to be super smart. He had not been to the US in many years because of the pandemic and the restrictions, blah, blah, blah. Indian Wells is kind of the unofficial tennis convention or confab where a
Right.
lot of the sponsors come out. There's TV appearances, there's business dealings that you have to do. And as Milos Raonic famously said once, you're your own CEO, really, of
Yeah.
tennis players. And I think Djokovic really wanted to go out there and do his stuff that he had to do and make people happy. But the
Yeah.
fact that he lost early in this tournament is not so much a big deal.
Yeah, I hadn't won this event since 2016. I know he hasn't been allowed to play the last couple years. It's not something he prioritizes. We mentioned at the beginning that it's a funkier part of the season. I'm still saying we'll wait till post Olympics, after French Open, after Wimbledon, after Olympics to see where his level is. It is nice to see some of these younger guys, and one we're going to get to, raise their level and really challenge him. Last note on Djokovic, Amy, is there anything in the tennis? And I know we're talking in the moment now. Anything in the tennis you think he needs to improve or work on when we're going forward into this year? Some adjustments he can make.
I was looking at his serve speeds. They're pretty much, this last match notwithstanding, they're pretty much as good as they've ever been. So I think the serve is fine. There was a little bit of weirdness on the forehand. The guys who were calling the match said that he was looping it a little bit more. Not sure what's going on with that. Um, I know he has a really good strategist, so he's scouting everybody. I mean, who am I to pick apart
Right.
Djokovic's game? I honestly think this was a one-off. I really do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, never going to count him out. It's just interesting and peculiar to hear him say he's confused with his level. But again, never going to count him out. We'll see what the Miami Open and then going into the clay court season leads. But right now, the hottest player in tennis without question is Jannik Sinner. He beat Ben Shelton last night in straight sets as we record this on a Wednesday. 15-0 on the year, Amy, to start. And yeah, you'd have to go back. There's only been one other player under 23 to do that. It was Stefan Edberg in 1987. So
Wow.
Sinner is blistering fast, beats Shelton in straight sets, and that match was competitive in the first set. I was so impressed with Sinner's ability, Amy, to just find a way, because if you talk about redlining, maybe nobody can redline and in short flashes better than Ben Shelton. Sinner was up against it. He had a time violation call. He had instances where he wasn't quite feeling at his apex, but he gets through it and he keeps that clean record. Yannick Sinner's development has been one to watch. I know you've seen it from a tennis standpoint, the weapons that he's added to his game and the overall consistency.
He played against Shelton an extremely disciplined match, particularly in that first set. Any baseball fans out there, the movie Bull Durham, Ben Shelton kind of reminds me of Nuke Lelouch in that movie because he's raw, he's great. You can see he's a little bit wild, highly entertaining, but you can see the greatness that's coming. But Sinner is a few years ahead, and he's made the right moves. One thing in that match that really impressed me, and really overall, is his defense, Sinner's defense. His ability, it's very Djokovic-like, his
Yeah.
ability to, if a ball is hit with a lot of depth, for him to either neutralize or turn that into offense. You think he's going to be in trouble, but he gets that ball back with depth. And that is trademark Novak. So maybe all those matches against Djokovic, he's really learned a lot.
Yeah, Courier mentioned it on the broadcast how he's really gotten stronger out of the corners, and it talks about the weight training, and it's everything, right? It's the work with Cahill and the team, but it's these tennis matches are, as you said, Djokovic winning one more point in the match, but losing it. It comes down to just a precious few points under some really, really stressful situations. It's all that practice, it's all that time he put in, it's the muscle memory that he trusts his game, that under duress he is going to come up with the goods, and he has. And for Shelton, it's going to get there. There isn't even really, and I've been impressed with Ben in a lot of ways too. How raw he is makes the potential seem almost that much greater. It's not even strategy at this point. It's executing a couple big points, which we eventually trust will get there. But his strategy has improved, and he played a pretty good first set, just wasn't able to execute as well as the hottest player in the world.
Yes, totally. And it was, a glimpse at the future. And you do start to see or think maybe this is a major changing of the guard. And these are the players that are going to take us into the future, including Alcaraz. And the players like Tsitsipas, who lost, maybe he was in that group that was sort of the bridge or the interim. And
Yeah.
then these are the future stars.
Well, they certainly look like future stars. Alcaraz, who won this title last year, is on the fast track to defend it. He has a potential one match away showdown with Sinner looming. He beats Morazan yesterday, the guy that took him out in clay last year, but it wasn't much adversity for Alcaraz. Really hasn't been much other than the first set of this tournament, and even that match he was able to turn around. He just looks, I know he hasn't won a title since Wimbledon, Amy, but he just looks so good, especially here. I was watching the match and watching his matches thinking, this might be his best event. Like, it's weird to say that given how good he looked on grass and clay, but everything, the court conditions, the comfort, how he's able to create magic. His courts are playing faster, but how he's able to create magic on a slower hard court. I just am so enamored with Alcaraz in general, but especially on the slow hard courts of Indian Wells.
Yes, these conditions are unique. It's slower, hard court, but fast air. So the ball can fly, but you have longer to get there. So some players do really well with it, including Alcaraz. Some players do not do well with it, including typically guys that have a one-handed backhand. Alcaraz, everybody has a fix for him. What of us,
Yeah.
I say let's let him coach himself and figure this out himself because he's so young and spongy that I think he's going to know the patterns to play and he's going to know what he needs to pick up and what he doesn't because he's so complete right now.
I'm a big glasses half full kind of guy, and I understand that we live in, especially sports where everyone's critical when you're on top and then you're not on top. What's wrong? I think a lot of it is just Sinner raised his level, and it's also easier when you're hunting versus being the hunted. And I think now Alcaraz given a chance to reset. Some of the injury luck too has just been unfortunate. Rolling an ankle, you can't really prevent that. It just happens. But I think it's been good for him to kind of hit the reset button relatively to where he was ranked, drop down out of being number one, regroup, work on some things. There's still so much left in his tennis career that I do think we're going to see, as you said, spongy is a great word. He's able to adapt and learn on the fly. And I also think that he's somebody that understands who the top guys are, who has beaten him before, like Zverev coming up, that he's licking his chops to, much like Djokovic, much like Federer, Nadal, raise his level as these tournament matches go on.
And his serve is, in my view of it or understanding of it, it's just getting slightly incrementally better and better and better, even though he hasn't won a tournament since Wimbledon. And his return game, Mitch, is right at the top of the tour. So for a guy like Zverev, who has a really elite first serve, but just so-so second serve, for a great returner, I think Alcaraz is going to know how to play that and take advantage where he can.
And that was Zverev yesterday, right? He beat de Minaur again, 3 sets. It was an interesting match, but it was also one where de Minaur is playing the tennis of his life, and it is one match, and he has played a lot of tennis, but that matchup just favors Zverev so well because he can do what very few can, and that's push de Minaur around, make him play on his heels. And his complete game, we saw it in the Alcaraz match and in the Medvedev match that he should have won, frankly, that Zverev has weapons that very few do. And when everything's working in lockstep and everything's in sync, Zverev clearly looks like one of the top 5 players in the world.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself watching that match, I can't believe he hasn't won a Grand Slam yet.
Yeah.
Because he is phenomenal. You're right. Like Alex de Minaur cannot be playing any better right now. I mean, he's playing his style to the nines, and Zverev really started to control that match after the first set. So, yeah, I did not pick Zverev for the Final Four, but I'm kind of regretting that because he could very well win this tournament.
More here with Amy Lundy on Tennis Channel Insight, and we're talking Indian Wells as we gear up for the final matches of the round of 16. We got quarterfinals, some sets, some still to be decided. A few more things on the men before we get to the women, and I do want to give a shout out to Yuri Heka, who was a 32 seed, has just been dismantling top players in Rublev and Tsitsipas back-to-back straight sets wins. Remarkable stuff from him. It was your co-host Gil Gross that last year picked Lehecka to do well, and I think he was just a year ahead of schedule. But in all seriousness, what Lehecka can do on a so hard court is another thing, and it's also, Amy, frustrates some top players. And Rublev and Tsitsipas, as you saw, as well as I did, very frustrated playing the Czech player.
Everyone is saying that Lehecka reminds them of Berdych and his fellow countrymen, and it may be even Berdych plus, because Lehecka hits some beautiful volleys, and Tomas did not like to come to the forecourt all that much. But Lehecka also had the right game plan against Tsitsipas because he just brutalized the backhand, and
That's it.
it was a beatdown.
Yeah, I'm glad we got some Czech players coming up, and I like Berdych, but Lehecka and Mahac and Mensik, like, we'll have other comparisons now. It'll be nice. We won't have to say, oh, Czech player Berdych.
But come on, even the way they look, right?
Yeah, they do. Those two do look the most similar, but it's like, oh, a guy has a backward hat on, he's Czech, he's Berdych. But I know you're right. I mean, and the Tsitsipas thing is frustrating, especially. I think Rublev, the mental state with him, obviously a lot's been discussed there, so hopefully he can get back on track. But Tsitsipas's backhand has unfortunately let him down in a lot of big matches, which is very unfortunate because so much of his game is, well, and he looks healthy, which is good too, but wasn't able to make a step up. And, out of the top 10 now, we'll see how Steph gets some momentum. He's been so close, as you said, but now you have to wonder with younger guys coming up, is he being passed by a newer, younger generation?
When Steph fell out of the top 10 fairly recently, there was just a plethora of articles about the one-handed backhand. Now it's really dying, right? So my editor at tennisconnected.com wanted me to write a story about, no, take the other view, Amy. The one-handed backhand, it's still alive. Come on. And I spent 2 weeks researching this, Mitch, and I started researching the junior ranks. And the truth is, I never wrote the story because there are very, very precious few juniors, especially boys. There are actually a few girls, but precious boys that have a few boys that have a one-handed backhand. So Steph's going to have to figure this out. I mean, obviously he's not going to change his stroke, but he may have to pick up the slice more and use that more. And he already runs around and hits forehand better than anyone in the game, but he's going to have to take it up a level.
In regards to other men still live in this tournament at the time of recording, how cool has it been from your perspective to see what Gael Monfils has done?
Oh, it's so fun, especially given everything that Svitolina has been through the last couple of years. And she'll occasionally mention, like if she goes deep in a tournament, she'll occasionally mention that Gael is the one looking after the little tot. And I just think so much about what this guy's life must be like right now. So you can't help but root for him.
Yeah.
And he's so entertaining to watch. Big air. I always want to see him come in more, and I actually have seen him come in more and put away balls in the forecourt. But
Yeah.
it's a great story.
37 going on 38, and he goes 3.5 hours with Cam Norrie, who's no slouch physically, after
Right.
beating Hubie. And look, tennis just keeps moving on, right? There's no easy going on the veteran. He gets Casper Ruud today, and that's not an easy follow-up at. So Ruud's another guy, Amy, that's been adjusting his game. Kind of had to hit the reset button after some struggles, but on hard courts especially, he's starting to show some of the best tennis of his life.
He could get back his momentum because the way he hits his backhand with a lot of topspin, I think
Yeah,
that could be a little bit more favorable on a slower hard
yeah,
court. And, his forehand, obviously, but just to have that extra little few milliseconds on his takebacks. Plus, he's in supremely good condition, so he's kind of a
yeah.
dark horse here.
Well, we've got a few other matches too, so this will be the choose your own adventure for us. By the time this is posted, we'll know who won. But Taylor Fritz, and the draw has just been incredible. You got Taylor
Yes.
Fritz taking on Holger Rune. You've also got Dimitrov taking on Medvedev. Medvedev just being a mad scientist. Like I was at that match Sunday night or Saturday night when he complained about a light flickering that no one could see. Walked off the court to a rain of showering of booze, but he did not care at all. And he loves being the villain and talking to himself. But Grigor is playing some of the best tennis of his life. So I do think he's a live underdog in this matchup. But Medvedev is someone that no matter what he's saying to himself or to others, no matter how he acts, he's always in the fight and always dangerous.
Yes, one of my favorite players to watch, and that really is a tribute to him because he plays a style that I don't really care for, the straight baseline and the way back return position at times. But that being said, he's so entertaining. Dimitrov, I happen to be checking around his career at Indian Wells. I think he made one semi, but he's just 13-10 overall. He does have that one-handed backhand. So if you know how to really get out of his strike zone on that wing, you can effectively play Dimitrov. But Medvedev hits a very flat ball, doesn't he? So
Yeah.
this should be a super interesting matchup tactically.
Something weird's gonna happen. Like I
Yeah.
can just see it now. Something's gonna get under Medvedev's skin. I don't know if it'll affect the match or help one player more than others, but that's just the Medvedev match. Well, the last thing, and I mentioned Fritz Runa, but you also have Tommy Paul sitting there, the beneficiary of Djokovic losing. Could be a chance for these American men to have their moment. Paul looked great in beating Hugo Humbert, who's been sizzling himself. And Fritz has won this event before, so if he can get by the tricky matchup of Holger, we could see another American go deep and maybe even go to the final weekend.
Paul is an interesting player. I picked him actually to finish as my top American at year end. And some people were like, no, 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 what are you talking about? Ben Shelton, yada, yada. Um, I just am in awe of people that can move like that on the court. I mean, and Paul has some things that, unlike Demonar, who's also a great mover, he actually has power and a very good serve, very very serviceable. He can move in, hit volleys. He's got touch. He's a pretty complete player. He's one of my favorite Americans.
Yeah, I think if you ask somebody that would agree with you, it'd be Carlos Alcaraz. If
Yeah.
you ask him which American he doesn't want to play, it'd be Tommy Paul. So that's a compliment there. Well, the men's tennis event's going to be great. Let's switch to the women now. I want to spend some time on that. And it's interesting, right? Like Rybakina didn't play, Amy. You look at the odds from the beginning of the tournament to even now. There's a clear top three that have emerged from that, and we'll see how it all shakes out. But Iga, Sabalenka, and Coco have separated themselves from the pack. Though the last two, Sabalenka and Coco, kind of playing a little bit with house money. They could have easily lost their first matches, but you know how these tennis tournaments work, right? Survive, advance, and it's a new day. Both have looked exceptional since nearly getting sent home early.
I wouldn't think that these type conditions would be right for Sabalenka because the ball can fly and she just freaking goes for it.
Dashes it.
And that's her first couple of matches. That's kind of what has been happening, but this is really Arena 2.0 where she's unlocked this discipline within her, and I've seen her dial it back. Now you
Yeah.
won't hear it because she still grunts as loud, but she's more contained if you actually look at the rally lengths and
Yeah.
how she can keep the ball in the court.
Arena, that match against Peyton Stearns, I was lucky enough to be there. It was 40-love on Stearns' serve. And I don't want to bash on Peyton. I'm a huge fan. It was a tough one. Her level was there. I think it's a huge sign going forward, even though there's no moral victories in tennis. But every other year, you're right. This is Arena 2.0. 40-love. She's checking out. She's airmailing a return that's going to hit the backstop. She's shaking hands and flying to Miami. But she dug in. She played safer in that game. And really, her development and her ability to weather the storm. There's always going to be the demons there. They're not going to go away. But her ability to just stay there, kind of gather herself, regroup, how hard she hits it cannot be understated. Seeing it in person, she's somebody that in every match is going to be a live weapon and somebody that you should fear. For Iga, though, I mean, especially could talk about conditions fitting her game. I mean, this is just looking like it's tailor-made for her. She added another breadstick to her collection, and I was researching the stats. She's got, as of I think 2 matches ago, over 10% of her matches have featured sets that were 6-0. So her sets won, she's got about 10% just bagling people. She finishes exceptionally well, and everything about her, the word I wrote down, Amy, is methodical. Iga is just a methodical tennis player that wears you down, that finishes strong, and it's just brimming with confidence right now.
I think you really hit it, especially these conditions being perfect for her because her forehand is such that clay and a slower hard court gives her that extra moment to wind up, and it's vicious. It really is. And she's got the mentality. So yes, she's tailor made for this.
Are you surprised? Let's not say, because we've talked about it, it's been much discussed. Working on her serve, overhauling it. Are you surprised with the timing of when she did it? Because we're seeing that, there's no perfect time for a tennis player. The season's long, you have all this stuff, but she finished the year so strong. We're seeing with Jessica Pegula now how it could be tough to implement a new serve in big matches and whatever your point in the schedule is. But are you surprised Iga decided going into 2024 to upgrade and retool her serve?
Um, No, I'm not surprised because she's one of those competitors who's not going to be satisfied. And she knew that she'd suffered a couple of losses and she wasn't getting enough free points on her serve. And I actually, Mitch, I don't think it's there yet. It's still a little bit awkward, but take heart, Iga, because Nadal tinkered and
Yeah.
tinkered and retooled again. And look at what that did for him.
I'm just laughing because I agree it's not there and she's still killing
Yeah,
most of the
right.
tour.
Exactly.
That's truly terrifying. For Coco too, Coco's looked very well. Turning 20 now, so is no longer a teenager. It was one of the longer teenage runs that we've seen. Fully cemented herself, Amy, as one of the top players in the game. There's one player in Iga that she just can't quite seem to get a hold over other than the one match. Sabalenka, I think she could match up pretty well on these courts, but how have you assessed Coco's level going into and now I'm halfway through Indian Wells?
There were a couple of scratchy matches, but the good thing is, even when she didn't have her A game, she figured out how to get through. So this is also kind of Coco 2.0 because she's really improved her forehand.
Yeah.
And I think, with the stronger mental game, she's going to be a contender in any tournament.
I think with Coco, you have a player that understands the stakes, understands the moments, and understands where she is on the pecking order. She's very confident. She's also very humble. She knows there's work to do. Like she knows where Iga is. She knows what Sabalenka did in Australia. I think that's the part of her game. There's a process with her. Don't want to name any names, but there's certain players that get to a level and okay, I've got it all figured out. I'm just going to play my A game, and I trust it. And then they're shocked when it doesn't work. So the different mentality that she has, which I think is special in tennis, is going to help her.
That is a great point. I mean, we could all use a little bit of that. Like, I got my plan, I got my A game, and I'm gonna go down in flames if I can't play my A game, and then we go down in flames a lot. So, that mentality is something that the big three all have. That
Yeah.
a fight, a solutions, looking for solutions, even when they're not playing their best or when they're injured.
Well, I want to shout out some other players in the women's draw that had runs, maybe still have runs going on. Caroline Wozniacki beat Angelique Kerber in another matchup of moms, which seems like everywhere you look now on the
Hmm.
tour, the draw has mothers in it. But again, shout out to Angelique Kerber at 36, making this run way ahead of schedule. But here's Wozniacki a year ago, was just sitting at home. We're doing some broadcast work. And now the mother of two is into the quarterfinals of our Masters 1000. Just a remarkable run from Wozniacki, who still, after retiring, felt like she had much left to give on the court, and she was right.
I think that they were saying on I think maybe Chanda was saying on the telecast the other day that she had heard either from Caroline herself or through the grapevine that Caroline just wasn't sure about this comeback. I mean, it is exhausting. It really is. Things that maybe some people don't even realize, like you'll be playing and suddenly a thought will creep into your head, I wonder if my child is okay or hungry or being looked after, and then you have to move that out, and you may have to move it out dozens of times over the course of the match. Plus, I know her wrist was swollen, but fortunately it healed, and she's looking great. So I hope that everything's okay and that she can hang in there a little bit longer, and that she's actually even surprising herself with some of these results.
I would I would think she's always been kind of known as a realist, that she's surprising herself with how she's done and how she's just attacked it every day, not notching some great wins. Another example of someone that's been, I think, ahead of schedule, and I've been more than pleasantly surprised with. But Naomi Osaka's level is starting to get there. Like, we know Rome's not built in a day, Amy, but from where she was, just from where she was pre-Australian Open to now, I've seen leaps and bounds with her game and her fitness and her timing. All the elements are getting incrementally better. And I do think we're on the verge of something happening. It might not be, in the next month or two, but she's getting there, I would say, with Osaka.
Yeah, the power is certainly still there. Now it's, containing that and remembering the patterns that got her to 4 Grand Slams. I said in the beginning that with Naomi's comeback, I thought it was going to be zigzag. Like we would see great moments and then, maybe she's adjusting and retooling, and then great moments and kind of an up and down thing. So I hope fans have patience with her and don't expect like a straight line trajectory, because she is still adjusting to being a mom and working on getting those fitness levels back.
It'll be interesting to see when she plays one of those 3 or 4 with Rybakina, one of those, top of the game now, what her level looks like in comparison to them. I'm not expecting it to be at I think it's a little unfair to expect it to be right there. But when you have measuring sticks in tennis, it's good to see where you are. So that's one for sure. Wrapping up here with Amy Lundy on Tennis Channel Inside In. A couple other thoughts on the women's game. I had some names I just wanted to mention. You've got Maria Sakkari working with David Witt now, and maybe finding her confidence. Sakkari is someone that I wanted to spend some time on because we all know what the issues have been. It's just the mental side of things have kind of gotten to her at a point. I like this partnership. I like the announcement, and I'm not totally shocked she's still alive in this tournament.
He is an incredibly stabilizing coach. If you're just grasping and you need to just go back to basics or just kind of calm things down, he's your guy. It doesn't surprise me at all that she's back
Yeah.
to playing up to her potential.
We also have another player that's been finding her potential too, Marta Kostyuk. She has a run in Australia. She's going deep into Indian Wells. It just seemed like with the game she has, it was going to happen. And I should also point out, she's got a tough match today playing, Sabalenka, but Emma Navarro, where she's come in the last year. And I don't know if you saw the quote where she said she's so zen, she has to actually psych herself up out there. It's pretty remarkable stuff.
I wish I could relate. I really do.
Yeah.
Navarro is super exciting. Kostyuk, I actually have a good story. A couple years ago, I was out at Indian Wells, kind of a couple of days before the tournament, watching Kostyuk practice. She was one of the only players out on the practice courts, working with Apostolos Tsitsipas, working on nothing except the +1 forehand. Like, that was the drill that they drilled for almost a full hour. It is so cool and exciting to see her hit that shot so effectively right after the serve, just looking for the forehand. So yeah, two great players, very exciting players, marketable, very cool players.
There's no confidence lacking with Kostyuk. You can go back in the Inside In archives. I had a chance to talk with her about 2 years ago, I want to say, and asked her what her goals were, and she just matter of fact said all 4 Grand Slams.
She's funny.
There's a believer there. Few things to wrap up with before I let you go. It's been a fun discussion here with Amy Lundy on Tennis Channel Inside In. I know you want to talk about this. Simona Halep getting reinstated. We'll play Miami, already down there practicing. Don't think it says a lot well for the policy and how punishments are enacted or dished out. But on the Halep side, great to see her back, and hopefully she can bring her best effort in next week's Masters 1000 in Miami.
The wheels of justice are grind slowly, but at least, they do grind. Just like she's a grinder.
Yeah.
The right decision was made in that case, because I got in there in the weeds and started reading about the testimony from the various scientists. And there were 2 main scientists that were just in total disagreement with each other. So I thought, well, if this were in the United States and our legal standards were applied, the benefit of the doubt would have to go to Halep. And fortunately, that's the way that it worked out. To her credit, she's not looking back. She's just looking forward, and super excited to see her play again.
Yeah, it seemed like she was working hard during her time off, and you're hopeful that the age factor hasn't caught up to her, that where she is in her life age isn't an issue here. But great to see her back. Want to end with this? I mean, as somebody else that you cover on your podcast, 3, what do you think Nadal's next move will be and will look like? I mean, he was announced for Monte Carlo. We'd like to see him back. It was unfortunate that he wasn't able to play Indian Wells, but Rafa rounding third, I think, metaphorically on his pro career. What's the next expectation for him?
It's so funny, on our podcast, probably toward the end of the year and maybe in January, I said that it wouldn't shock me if Rafa played the Las Vegas thing and then went out, played golf with Larry Ellison. I don't know if I used those exact words, met his sponsor obligations, did his work that he does, and then pulled out of the tournament. And that's exactly what happened. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad sign that he's not going to play here in the States, because everybody knows he's got to get ready for clay. He rarely plays Miami anyway. And I read a report that he was playing on Larry Ellison's private court and just looked incredible, was just smacking the ball. So, I'm bullish on the spring and summer for him.
Rafa's a very proud guy. He's also has an expectation for himself that I think very few could even comprehend, and it shows you the difference between exhibition tennis and the pro game. He knows what to expect from himself. If he steps on that court, there's going to be no sympathy. It's win or lose, and I don't fault him at all if he's not ready for not playing. So hopefully Monte Carlo in the clay court season is a good one for Rafa. Amy Lundy, this was always fun. It always is. Anything coming up, columns we should look at, or anything on your media agenda coming up?
I always spend a lot of time on my previews, so I'm going to be doing a big Miami preview. And if something really interesting happens in either the men's or women's final, I'll wrap that up.
Okay. Well, we'll be on the lookout for that. Amy Lundy, it's always fun having you join us here on Tennis Channel Inside In. Thanks for taking the time to talk tennis, talk Indian Wells on the podcast.
So much fun. Thanks for having me, Mitch.